Good evening, everyone, and welcome to NUITEQ's latest webinar series for Snowflake. Tonight, Danielle Macklin will be leading us in a webinar about lists and groups, how to organize your Snowflake lesson activities. So as always, if you have any questions, please put those questions in the questions tab. I will relay them to Danielle at an appropriate time. And anything that you need from us, please feel free to email at jr@nuitec.com. Welcome, Danielle. Thank you very much again for leading us this evening.
Hi, everyone. So as Jack was saying, we are going to spend some time tonight talking about how to organize some of your lesson activities using our groups feature and list feature. I love organizing, and I love anything that is a to-do list or something that's just kind of a quick, easy way to put all my activities together. And I'm a huge fan of how to use the list and groups feature in Snowflake. So I'm going to share with you my Snowflake from my lesson activities dashboard. So as I've logged in and loaded up my lesson activities, I can see that I have under my lesson activities, I have the option for lists and I have the option for groups. So I'm going to first share with you lists, and then we'll talk a little bit about groups and some of the differences and similarities between those. So in the list feature, lists, I always look at it like a playlist. So if I were using this in my classroom with my students, this could be how would I organize my lesson activities and additional materials in a way that made sense for delivering instruction. So here I have a couple different examples already made. I have math lists, as well as science lists, a telling time series, some brain breaks, and a series on ancient Greece. The way that the lists would play, and I'll use my science lessons because I really like this one. So you can see I have the lesson activities. I also have an attached PDF, and I also have a short recording. This is of the moon landing, and then the lesson activities to play as well. So if I'm using this in class, if I'm doing my in-person instruction, I can play the list by selecting play, and it'll play on my interactive panel in order that I've created it. I also can select play randomize, and that will just put all of the different lesson activities and pieces in different orders. And I can also send this to my students. So you see that I've selected the more option, and then I can send it to students if I'm using this for remote instruction and I wanted my students to complete all pieces of the lesson activity. So to play my list, I'm going to go and just play in order. And we'll just do the first maybe 3 to see the different pieces of it. So first, it's going to start by playing audio. But you can hear that's the audio from the moon landing, so my students could listen to the audio. This could be an MP3 file that I've saved, or it could be audio that I've recorded, and I'll show how to do that in a moment. And then using the navigation tab at the bottom, we would go through the different lesson activities and pieces of my list. So this first piece has a PDF about NASA, a little bit more info about the moon landing. My students could read through this attached PDF. We can see there's multiple pages. My students would also have the option to print or download any of that PDF to come back to at a later time. And then now we have the lesson activity. And as my students would play the lesson activity, so this one, it would be geography of the moon. As my students would play the lesson activity, once they've completed that, they could go on to the next one. If it were finished, it would automatically go to the next one, or we can skip through and go to another part. I can also go back at any other part of my lesson activity. So that is the way the lists look. Now let's look at how we can build a list. And to create a list, I would simply go at the very top to the option Create New List, and then I can add my new list name. I'm going to have this be my, we'll do it for an ELA class. So as a teacher, I could use this as one day of instruction, lining up all the activities I want my students to do during that instruction, or I could have my weekly schedule of what we were going to do during the duration of the week, or just different activities that build upon skill level. So I've created my class. Now I'm going to add lesson activities to that. So from my lesson activities dashboard, see my in progress lesson activities. I'm going to simply select the 3-dot option and then add to list. And we can see all of my different lists. So if I wanted to add this to multiple lists, I have the option to do that there. I could also create a new list from here if I didn't have my list already made. In this case, I'm just going to add this to my ELA class. So now I have it there. And I'm going to add this lesson activity as well. Add to list. There we go. And now I have both of those lesson activities added to my list. So if I go back to my ELA list, and since it is the most recent one, it's going to be at the very bottom. My scrolling, I have the option to add more information to this. So from the more option, I can edit the info. So just like I would change my description, my age group, all of my tags, adding my standards, I can include that at the beginning of my list. I also have the option to add an audio recording. So I had shared with you before the MP3 file that I uploaded. I could also record my audio. So just as we can add audio to our lesson activities to the different tiles, we can record audio here. So please complete the lessons in this list of ELA lesson activities. And then once I save that audio is now going to be part of my list. And I can also attach a PDF. So this could be a supplemental worksheet that I want my students to complete. It could also be, we'll use this one. It could also be a pre-reading that I might want my students to do that relates to the lesson activity. So it would just upload as a PDF. It could be my basic instructions, whatever I needed for my students. So that's a very simple how to build the list. And then I also have the options of sending that list to the Snowflake community so I could share it out publicly so that all the pieces are together. I can send it directly to my students, or I can do a little more. I can edit some information in that. So from the edit list, I have the option of moving the different pieces around. So if I wanted maybe my recording at the beginning, I can drag to the beginning and now move the different pieces as I want them to be played in the lesson activity itself. And then again, I can send from here to my students. I can play from my computer, randomized, or I can play in order. So if I play in order, we can see here's my audio recording. So please complete the lessons in the, and then I have the lesson activities. And since I'm playing here, I'd have to go through and complete the lesson activities. So you can see with this one students would have to match to the type of punctuation that would be used. I'm trying to go fast. There we go. And then as you can see, as they finish, it's now going to help me advance, allow me to move through to the next part of the lesson activity. And that would be my attached PDF. So there's my information on quotation marks for direct speech. And then I go to the next lesson activity. So this is a really great tool if you want to have all of your information for the day delivered in one place for all of the instructions that your students would be using. All right. So from lists, the other feature that we have as a way to organize your content are groups. So lists, like I said, I look at this like a playlist of how am I going to use my different lesson activities, my PDFs, and my audio in my instruction. The other feature is creating groups. And I look at groups often like collaborative workspaces. So it is a place where you can put your lesson activities, and you can include additional colleagues to view the activities, to add activities, and have that one place, that resource for you and another group of teachers. Or you could even have groups that involve students. And we'll go through just to show a little example of what that might look like. So if I look at my middle school team, this might be all the lesson activities that I would want related to a middle school cross-curricular activity. I have my different group members that have been added to my group. And then I have the activities themselves. And I can filter through my activities. So if I wanted to change how I was looking at it, or if I wanted to look for a particular lesson activity type. So similar features as far as filtering in the community, we have that also on the groups feature. I can also edit my group, so I can change members and responsibilities of those members and permissions for those members within my group. And then building the group is really easy as well. So like I said, I look at this like a collaborative space. It could also be a space for particular subjects or content. So if I were an elementary teacher and I had my ELA class, my math class, my science class, my socials class, I could put my lesson activities in these individual groups so that all of the activities are organized in that one space. I can invite other teachers, I can invite students, or I could just use it just for myself as my own place to keep track of where all of my lesson activities are. In building a group, I'm going to go from my groups to create new group. And in my group, I can add in an image to my group. So I'm pulling in from my computer. I'm just going to add, I'll do this little fall picture. I might have too big of a picture. It has to be 100 by 100 pixels. So I'll just do a little smaller one. There we go. So I mean, not a cute one, but gives you an idea of how to change and add the group. I would have my group name. So we're going to call this our webinar group. I can add descriptions for my group. So testing. And then now simply by hitting create, my group has been made. And then from here, I have the ability to add new members. So right now I'm the only person in this group, but by selecting edit, I can go through and I can add group members one at a time by adding their email addresses. So I'm going to add myself to the group. I can add multiple other members. If I were doing this with my students would simply need an email in order to be added to the group. And then I have the ability to manage my group members. So by managing members, I can have their names be visible on lesson activities that members have shared. So if I want their name on it, it would appear in the group. If I don't want their name, I can disable that feature. And then I have different permission settings. So it defaults to having group members as member only. Members can browse the lesson activities that are in the group. They can play the lesson activities, and they can add the lesson activities, but those added lesson activities would need to have an admin approval. And those activities would be found right down here where it says manage lesson activities. So if Danielle at NUITEQ.com tried to add a lesson activity, and since she's not an admin, that activity would need to be approved before it would be accepted into the group.
Danielle?
Yes.
In what instance would a student be adding a lesson to a group?
It's a really great question. So this would be a really great feature to use if you were having students move to being creators of content. So by setting up students with their Snowflake.live accounts, they have the ability to create lesson activities, and they can use those lesson activities as a way to demonstrate their understanding of concepts, of the content that you're teaching or the skills that you're teaching. And they can create those lesson activities and then share them back with you within the group as a way for you as the teacher to assess that they understand those skills and that content. So it's a really good way for them to just demonstrate mastery of the concepts. So that's one way that students would be able to use groups. And then from that, once they're in the group, they can have the ability to view any content that's made by their other group members, which would be really great to use for reviewing or for reteaching as necessary. So, and that would be if you're adding students, I would recommend adding students as members only. So making sure that that is the only option. And then that way, as the teacher, you'd have the ability to approve their lesson. You can see here we have review new or accepted. You would have to approve a lesson activity before it would be accepted into that group. So if there were errors on it, your student could go back, edit that, fix that. And as an admin, if something's added in that needs to be edited later, you could delete the lesson activity from the group and have the student re-upload it later. Once they're marked as admin, they would be able to control what is added to the group. So if I'm using this as a collaborative space with my fellow teachers, I would want my teachers as admins, because then I know that the lessons that they're creating, the content that they're making, would be stuff that we could share across our grade level or across our subject area. So I would just have them be able to easily put in those materials, put in those lesson activities. I wouldn't need to approve that. And then they could also play and edit from their own dashboard any of the lesson activities that are within the group. So once I'm happy with any of the changes, adding my members, or if I wanted to edit any of the pieces up here, I would simply hit apply changes. And now we can see I have my members in my group. Right now, I don't have any lessons in my group, so we need to fix that. So I'm going to go back to my lesson activities. And with groups, the only way to add lesson activities to your group is they need to be shared lesson activities. So this could be shared publicly to the Snowflake community, or it could be any of your lesson activities that have been shared privately. So ones that haven't been published in the community, but that are, I have to think of shared as my final draft version of my lesson activities. So I can grab we'll do effects of the sun. And to add it to my group, I go to more options, share with group. And now we can see all of my groups that this has been added to. So right now it's in 2 separate groups. I want to add that to my webinar demo group. And then now that lesson activity has been added. Now, if you are creating groups with your students, when they share a lesson activity, the only option they have is to share it within a group. So they cannot publish it to the Snowflake community. So they can only share it into a group that they've been added into. So that was one of the new updates that we made within Snowflake. I go back to my group. I can see there's the lesson activity that I have. And all members of my group would be able to see the lesson activity. They would be able to play that lesson activity, and it would open within their own lesson activities dashboard. So if there were anything that needed to be edited or any accommodations that they wanted to make for their students, that could be done just on their dashboard, and it won't change the original one added to the group. So a lot of information, 2 of my favorite features, lists and groups. So I'm going to give everyone a little bit of time to marinate on that and ask any questions that you might have on how to use the list feature or the group feature in your own classroom.
Danielle, there is a question. If students share to a group, a lesson activity to a group, are the teachers able to reshare those lesson activities to the community if they see them as appropriate?
Yes, absolutely. So once a lesson activity has been added to the group, so I'll go back to my demo group. So here we have a lesson activity. Now this is my activity. I shared it, I added it in. I can play that activity. And when I hit play, I have the option playing from my account, which would be the original that I made, or I might want to edit and add an additional copy. So in this case, I'm just adding an additional copy because maybe I might want to do a quick change on something or add a little extra feature to the lesson activity before sharing it publicly to the Snowflake community. So if this were one that my student had created, and I wanted to do any part of editing, I have the option to do that. So I'm going to go to edit. And we'll just say, oh, we'll call this should be marked as part 2 vocabulary. And then now I have the option from here, I can share my students' lesson activity to the Snowflake community. I have my option to keep it private, so only visible to me and anyone that I share it in the group with. I could share it publicly to the entire Snowflake community for anyone to search for and anyone to enjoy. Or I can share unlisted. And when it is unlisted, that means it is available in the community, but you would need the link in order to access the lesson activity. So if this were my students, I have the ability to share that within the Snowflake community. So I'm going to go back to my group.
So a clarifying question was that you can share it, but the students are not able to share themselves.
Yes. Yep, absolutely. Which is really great because sometimes students might not make stuff that is of the quality that you'd want to see in the Snowflake community, or maybe they have errors on it, and having it shared to the group and then you as the teacher deciding whether or not it should be published just adds a little extra buffer in between that.
Thank you very much, Danielle.
Thank you. Oh, I hear some beeping, so maybe there's some questions coming
in. 1 second. Let me go over it. So, just someone saying, as always, thank you. So yes, thank you very much, Danielle. I really do appreciate the hard work that you put into the webinars. We would like to thank those of you that attend the webinars. We're glad that you are able to come and get something out of them. And again, please feel free. Any questions, any suggestions, drop me an email at jr@nuitec.com. Thank you, Danielle. Good night, everyone. See everyone next week.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.